see such a good number here this morning. You're visiting with us. We appreciate you being here. Or some of you visiting and you kind of show up once in a while. And I'm going to be gentle this morning. I'm going to try to be nice and just tell you, you need to show up more. When you get a chance, you just need to come by more. It's good to see some back from not feeling good, and it's good to see some back that have been on business and doing other chores and stuff. And I've already threatened a couple of them. We're going to get to a point where we're going to have to just nail your foot to the floor and let you run circles because you ain't leaving. You got to stay here. We're happy that you're here today. The text I'm going to talk about here is in part, he read half of it for you. 1 Corinthians 11 is an interesting text. It's not Paul whining, okay? This is not what he's doing here. He's merely stating facts as they are. For some reason, it's just the case in 2 Timothy 3:12, anyone desires to live as a Christian, you're going to suffer persecution. Now, that implies something immediately to me. If you're not suffering persecution because of your Christianity, you need to rethink your dedication to God. Because Paul told Timothy, this is the lot that we have chosen. This is the way we need to go. It's what we ought to accept. It ought to be a part of who we are. And that's so contrary to our culture today and the way we are just surrounded with so many conveniences, so many things easier than what maybe they once were. And it's hard for us to apply the discipline necessary to go through things that are not pleasant in order to see a positive result. And we just don't have that often, which is an odd thing to me because we've got the Olympics going on, and there's all kinds of sports analogies one can make about how no pain, no gain, and if we're not going to dedicate ourselves, we don't expect to see the result. And yet here we are as Christians, and we're looking for the easy way. There is no easy way to be a Christian, okay? There's not. And Jesus made that clear in Matthew 7:13-14. There is no easy way to be a Christian. Now, I realize, as I've said many times before, that's a hard sell. Because you need to be a Christian so you can suffer. Yeah, that doesn't market well, okay? But it's the way of it. And Paul understood that, and I want to kind of look at chapter 11, particularly that last part, from a perspective of this is the way it happens. And really, he's just calling a spade a spade. And when he does so, he uses illustrations, analogies, frames of thought, and manners of speech that are very often taken poorly. I mean, like the first one that we're going to look at, which is very often taken poorly, but we need to understand that it is a viable way to teach truth. Now, you have to be cautious as to how you use it. But it's called sarcasm. And I would also hasten to point out the fact that when sarcasm is used, it's usually not received real well. But I want you to note, as he talks about being a fool, let no one think me a fool. I'm not a fool, but what I'm speaking, I'm going to boast a little. In fact, it's interesting, 16 times from chapters 10, 11, and 12, boasting or glorying, as was read, that's stated in this text. And he clarifies, I speak not according to the Lord. Jesus is not given to this, I'm not either, but I'm using this as an example of how you're not doing it right. Evidently, Paul's apostleship itself was in question here, and they were questioning his sincerity. And it's amazing when he goes through this list of things that he is willing to suffer for others. Anybody could question whether or not he was sincere. But you know, that's one of the issues that we're going to have when we talk to people. In fact, I like it. It's not intended to be derogatory or to put someone down, but it's very much like that child who is by their parents told no. And the child responds. Of course, in my house, they'd only do that once, because that would be the last time they would ever do it again. But the parent tells the child no, and the child goes, you hate me, you don't love me because you won't let me have fun. And like I said, that would happen much as I was bringing my children up, because they would learn immediately that is an improper response and that has negative consequences. And yet that's exactly how we're treated sometimes when we tell people a truth that is very difficult. Part of the persecution we suffer doesn't really jive with Paul's going through the deep and getting stoned and let down out of a city wall on a basket. Most of us have not experienced that. But don't kid yourself, we get persecution. And one part of the persecution that we need to steel ourselves and be ready to accept and understand is the kind of persecution that says, oh, well, you're judging me. Isn't that the famous line now that we use these days when we don't like what we hear? You're judging me. Well, frankly, I'm judging righteous judgment, so that would be, I don't judge by appearance, I judge righteous judgment. But when I tell you the truth, do you not understand the motivation behind it? It's not an I'm right and you're wrong. I'm not trying to win an argument, but I am trying to tell you the truth of something, and it's not received well. And that's at the point in time when sarcasm works pretty good, evidently, according to Paul, who said, imitate me as I imitate Christ in 1 Corinthians 11:1. And so he goes on to say in verse 19, for you put up with fools gladly, since you yourselves are wise. You reckon he's really commending them for their wisdom there? Or is he being a bit snarky here? What we might call a little bit sarcastic. That's a very good teaching tool to allow people to realize, the position you are pressing is not smart. And you're above that. You're beyond that. You should know better than this. And I guarantee you there's not a parent in here that hadn't looked at their child at one time or another and said, what were you thinking? Not implying that they, were thinking. Because you expect better of them. And when we tell somebody, I want to tell you about the truth of the gospel, part of the persecution we're going to receive is that they're going to tell us, you don't really love me because you're telling me these things that I'm doing wrong. Y'all get ready for that because it's going to happen. And it happens because people sometimes, even though they claim to want to know the truth, don't really want to know the truth. Look at 1 Corinthians. Paul's got a history with these people, okay? And this is another thing about sarcasm. You shouldn't just use it freely with anybody. You use it with people you really love and really care about and really know that they can handle this. And what you usually find out sometimes is when you do use sarcasm, some people don't handle it very well. It's just not effective for them. However, it can be a very effective teaching tool. Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 4:10, he knows these people. We are fools for Christ's sake, he says, but you are wise in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. You are distinguished, but we are dishonored. You reckon he's bragging on them there? Or do you think maybe he's trying to tell them, y'all are thinking of yourselves in a way that's not proper, or y'all are pushing a position, as you find out in 1 Corinthians 5, you're promoting a position that's totally wrong. And your soul's in jeopardy. We've got to convey to people, with the understanding that we're liable to be persecuted for it, that we're here to tell you how much we love you and point out things in that conduct that you have been practicing that need to be changed. And that's an uncomfortable thing. Don't get me wrong. Everybody understands. If changing was so easy, this building would be full. People would be clamoring to hear the truth and want to change their life immediately. And don't you know that's the way we respond when somebody tells us we're wrong? Oh, thank you so much for telling me I was wrong. Now I'll correct it immediately. I don't do that. Do y'all? I don't react that way very well. But yet, perhaps we should. And so Paul uses this sarcasm in chapter 11, verse 19. Oh, you put up with fools. These people who are coming in here and telling you false things. Notice back a few verses how adamantly opposed to the teachings that they were listening to and countenancing and accepting instead of what Paul was saying. Notice how he characterizes them. He says in verse 12, but what I do, I also continue to do. They might cut off the opportunity from those who desire an opportunity to be regarded just as we are in the things which they boast. In other words, there are people coming in here telling you stuff like we do, but notice, for such are false apostles, deceitful workers. Now, he didn't cut any slack here. He's telling them exactly who they are. transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ, and no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into the man of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if the ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end is according to their works. These people who are soiling and spoiling the truth, and they're vaunting themselves and approving of themselves, and of course he's telling these Corinthians, why are you listening to these people? What they're teaching is wrong. And when you tell somebody what you're teaching and being taught and what you're accepting is wrong, you can't expect a ready audience. Some of the persecution we will suffer has to do with people not liking what we are about to say. You know, it's interesting to me how many would respond to even particular sarcasm as a way or manner of teaching, to the opposite, and say, oh, but we're supposed to say things nice. Colossians 4:16, let your speech be seasoned with salt. Yes, that is true. And salt makes stuff taste good. Doctors have told me my food has been tasting way too good lately. And I disagree, but I think they're probably right. But a lot of salt sure does make things taste good. Unless you got a canker in your mouth, and then it kind of hurts when it hits that little sore in your mouth. And of course, that's the parable of the sower, about a sower going out to sow, and what really made the difference is the soil upon which the seed fell. That makes the difference. In fact, people have misunderstood, and I've made this comment before in Ephesians 4:15, we are to speak the truth in love, and that has nothing to do with the manner in which we speak it. It has everything to do with the motive that we speak it. In fact, I am convinced that's what makes rejection so disappointing for us. Because don't people realize that your soul is at stake? And I'm not telling this to you because I'm better than you. That's not the case. In fact, if we ever conveyed that, we're wrong. Because we're not better than anyone. We're not telling you this because we're in an argument and I want to win an argument. In fact, we need to be very cautious. Those of us who do some conflict resolutions on occasion, we need to be very cautious to remove that from our train of thought when we are discussing something where we're on opposing sides with somebody. It's not about winning the argument. It's about really searching to find the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter is what's important. And you know, people will not understand that. And quite often they will express it in such vituperous, violent ways that you'll wonder, don't they get it? Paul, just continuing on in this very book, look over a page in chapter 13. Chapter 12, the next chapter. In chapter 12, verse 15. Do you ever feel like this? I mean, this is part of the persecution we should expect, okay? It's part of the Christian life. Paul makes the statement, I will very gladly spend and be spent for your souls. Now, this is a sideline. Let me just point out, this is the attitude we should have with those we love and care about. Our family, our close family, our extended family, our friends, the acquaintances we meet and begin to develop a relationship with, we should be willing to be spent for their soul's sake. That's the attitude we need to have. But you'll notice what happens sometimes, and this hurts. And that's why it hurts sometimes to say something when you just assume, yeah, when I say this, they're going to come back in flames and a ball of fire. And he says, though the more abundantly I love you, the less I am loved. Don't kid yourself. Persecution does fall into the category we're going to look at next, but it certainly falls into the category of being misconstrued, misunderstood, and misapplied. Because people look at us and think, oh, you think you're better than us. Oh, you Church of Christers think you're the only ones going to heaven. All of the patent mantras that people throw into our face when we honestly and sincerely, I would hope, are trying to help them understand the truth that will make the difference between heaven and hell. There is a persecution that Paul was suffering from his own brethren, the Corinthians, because he was teaching the truth. Hard truth about being a Christian, if you suffer persecution, you're probably doing something right if you're trying to follow Christ. I mean, after all, and right at the beginning. They stoned Stephen. Paul had to climb out of a window and be dropped down a wall on occasion. He was stoned, left for dead. They killed Jesus, and Jesus spent his entire life on this earth in his ministry being in conflict. We need to, we talked about it in Bible study this morning, we need to be adept and well-schooled in how to handle conflict, because the very basis of our understanding of Christianity is that very few will be saved. And so we need to get out and teach people and understand it's not always going to have a great reception. But we must stick with the truth and be willing to take the abuse people give us. Paul is not whining here. As a matter of fact, I'm going to look at this next section here a little bit differently, because if you look through this, I'm looking at, I'm a Hebrew, well, I'm not. I'm the seed of Abraham, well, I'm not. Verse 22 is where I'm going to on this. Ministers of Christ, well, we're all ministers of Christ, okay? But do we labor more abundantly in stripes above measure in prison? I have not been in prison. I hope that doesn't surprise anybody. But anyway, I've not been in prison. So, I don't have this experience here in deaths often. No, I haven't received stripes. This almost does, it seems like this doesn't really apply to us, but yes, it does, and here's how it does apply. When it comes to our conduct and who we are and what we embody as Christ lives in us, it is going to be the fact that we are going to be persecuted, and our life ought to speak volumes about how much we care. Why would Paul go through all of this? Why would he be persecuted like this? Why would he suffer all this? And he's telling these Corinthians, don't you realize I'm boasting here, which is totally useless. Christ never said, I'm the Son of God. Y'all just need to throw down yourself at my feet and you need to worship me. He didn't do that. He said, I'm the Son of God. Let me show you how it's done. And he got down on his knees and washed feet. Paul is doing this, and he said, this is not the way Jesus would do it. I'm doing this to show you how foolish what you're doing is. You've got nothing to boast about. You are nothing without Christ. That's what the Christian understands. But how important is that soul? Well, it's important enough that the persecutions you endure, that's part of the game. And that's what he's saying as he goes through this long litany of things that he suffers physically. It's worth it for your soul. I guess the urgency is just gone in our culture, where we have such convenience, so many medical things that can be done, the technology we have these days. Well, I know for a fact that there are many of us here who have been through procedures. If you're honest with yourself, it's because we live in the day and time we live now that you're able to make it right now and alive still. I mean, my dad had just a simple appendix operation to take his appendix out, and woke up during the middle of the operation because the anesthetic wore off. And he said, I remember that. Yeah, I would too. It's amazing how long we live now and how well we're cared for. Even sometimes, let's be honest, when we don't take as good care of ourselves as we ought to. I just need to slack off the salt. I know that. I've almost given up cheesecake. I said almost. But, I understand sometimes we are our own worst enemies. But frankly, we live in a time that allows us to be effective in God's kingdom a lot longer than what once it was the case. But you know what our life ought to project and bugle and trumpet is that this guy or this woman loves me so much, they are willing to put up with what I'm dishing out to them and still love me and still care about me. And that's what Paul's saying in this book right here, in this text right here. Look at what I've been doing. Do you not understand that I'm doing this not because I enjoy pain? I'm doing this because your soul is worth it. One of the greatest plagues that we'll have, disappointments that we'll have as Christians, and I call it a persecution because it goes along with the rest of the text, is found in verse 28. And I love the way Paul says it, because it's almost all the stuff he's been through physically is just, okay, that's minor. Let me tell you what's really important. And this is a persecution that many of us appreciate. disappointment because of the love we have for someone that is near and dear to us who will not hear. And he's speaking to a church. This is third round for him in 2 Corinthians. It's the third round of him trying to tell them, hey, I'm trying to get through to you guys, and it's like hitting a brick wall. You're not hearing me on this. Although some things were better. They did a couple of things right, and he commended them. But for the most part, he's saying, the more I love you, the more you hate me. What's going on here? That's the persecution some suffer when they stand for the truth. Notice what he says in verse 28. Besides all these other things, he's just listed a long, and then he goes on after that, by the way, and he lists some other stuff physically that he's had to endure. But besides all those other things, what comes upon me daily? My deep concern for all the churches. Paul went all over the place teaching and preaching the gospel. He established or started congregations in multitudes of places, even going back off a missionary journey and making a second missionary journey to check in on a bunch of the ones he had settled. I'm sure he did not find everything copacetic every time he went into a congregation he had settled, but certainly Corinth was having struggles, and they were not even accepting him as an apostle, him for what he was saying, the fact that he was doing what he needed to do. All of those things just almost didn't matter because they weren't listening to him. Persecution comes in many forms. And yeah, when a lot of people talk about persecution, the first thing we think about is going over to a country that's communist and totally antithetical to Christianity in all ways. And yes, they're going to take you and imprison you because you preach the gospel. We don't have that problem here in this country. No, what we get is snarky looks, and we get put down and ridiculed, and people mock us. And you know what's really frustrating is that just seems to be enough for some people to say, oh, I'm not going to go there. It's so uncomfortable for them, those that I love, or people I know, to look at me and put me in a box and say, oh, you're one of those Church of Christers. By the way, that term's nowhere in the book. Okay, that's meant derogatorily. It's very similar to the Christians, the disciples of Christ, Acts 11:26, being called Christians in Antioch. But that's not what they were titled. Oh, no, this sect of the Nazarenes, that's what you got called by the world. That was derogatory, intended to be such. No, Isaiah 62:2 talks about the new name God would give us, and that's Christian. That's it. Church of Christers is not there. That's why people say it. Many of you are too young to remember Campbellites. I don't know the last time anybody in here might have been called a Campbellite. There's an old one for good. Yeah, they throw that in your face like that puts you down because you're following a man, just like they are. Persecutions are not necessarily something physical, but certainly in physical persecutions as well as mental and spiritual. We ought to be living such a life that our love for the lost is so exemplary and so visible, it manifested in every fiber of our being in existence, that people understand at some point in time they really do care about my soul. Not everybody will come to that realization. Let's be clear. Paul was struggling with those who ought to have known better, hence the sarcasm. But very often, even those who know better just don't get it. When we love each other, like we love the world and want the world to be saved, we'll even do the same favor for each other. We'll work with each other. We'll help each other. We'll lift each other up. And sometimes, because we are human, the methodology we use won't always be acceptable, and maybe we need to rethink how we approach someone, but nevertheless, if you love someone, you will approach them because their soul is that valuable. This entire chapter is about being in love with people's souls. He starts out the chapter in verse 2, I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. That's not a phrase you hear very often. The idea of being jealous being something good. But our God is a jealous God. He doesn't want us worshiping any other person, any other being, and certainly not idols. God's a jealous God. And so shouldn't we care enough about each other to go the extra mile to do what it takes to put ourselves out there and take the abuse and the persecution so that somebody knows, I love your soul. I care about you. You know, Lois mentioned in class, in his classes, by the way, I get to trot on his class next week before he even gets to my sermon next week. Just saying. I don't get this opportunity very often, but in Galatians 4:16, have I become your enemy because I tell you the truth? Well, yeah, in some cases that will be the case, and that's the persecution we should be willing to endure because these souls are valuable. We want them to be saved. We want them to know the truth. And they won't know it. In fact, we may be what stands between them and eternity in heaven if we don't say anything. They may not make it to heaven because we failed in telling them, I care about your soul, I love you dearly, I want you to go to heaven with me. And yeah, this ain't going to be fun. But I'm going to tell you because I love you. And then be ready to accept the persecution you will receive very often because you tell somebody the truth. This is the love of God. This is what Jesus exemplified, not just washing the feet. Oh, when compared to the cross and what he was willing to do for you and I. Our entire hope is based on the fact he was willing to die for our sins. We couldn't fix that. He did. And while we were yet sinners, Christ died. He loved you and I when we weren't lovable. How can we do less with those we love in the brotherhood, but also those in the world, our neighbors and friends, our family? How can we not feel the same way and be willing to put up with anything as long as the gospel that saves gets into their hearing? And you never know. Even after some pretty serious persecution, many of you probably experienced it like I have, and people rejecting the truth and giving you grief because you told them, later on when they ruminate, they think about it, meditate on it, they say, it wasn't about the person who told me. It was about the truth that was being told. That's the distinction and why we ought not to make this personal or be upset or be discouraged or be dejected because somebody didn't respond to the truth when they should know that I love them. We need to keep on keeping on. We need to keep on encouraging people to love the truth, no matter how they respond to it, and be willing to take the persecution if it comes. It's not a great sell for being a Christian to tell them, yeah, we need you to be a Christian so you get abused. I understand that's a tough sell, but I'll tell you what, heaven will be worth it all. There is nothing on this planet worth going to hell for. Nothing. I want to go to heaven. I want you to go to heaven. I want you to encourage me to tell the truth. I want to encourage you to tell the truth. I want you to love souls so much that it doesn't matter the persecution you receive. You're going to tell the truth. You're going to speak it in love because you love souls. And you're going to try to make your speech seasoned with salt. But even the more you tell the truth, the less someone loves you, you're still going to try. I'd invite you to do that. If you're not a Christian this morning, we invite you to become one. If you don't know what to do, please speak with someone who's a member. They will be happy to show you what they did in the Bible to become a Christian. If you are a Christian, haven't been living right, we always offer this invitation to get your mind back on where you need to be, and we encourage you with a song to sing.